In today's live stream, we're going to be talking about 3 different ways that you can add more creativity to your ukulele practice. And this concept was actually inspired by a user here at Rock Class 101. Rachel made this amazing video of Drunken Sailor, which is a lesson that I did. And she added claw hammer to it, and it's absolutely awesome. So if you're watching this as a recording, you'll see it in just a moment. And if you're watching this live, be sure to check back to see this video posted to see her playing it, because it is fantastic. And so Andrew and I talked about this idea of just, introducing some other concepts in a similar vein so that you can take things that you're already playing and hopefully just make them a little bit more fun and engaging through some of these creative techniques and approaches. And so we're going to talk about 3 ways. Let's start with the first one. The first one is switching up the technique that you're playing with. So to talk about this, I'm going to show you a very basic chord progression. You've probably played it before, right? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to play, let's play a C chord, an F chord, and a G chord. 3 very basic chords you've probably all played before. And let's do a really basic strum pattern. Let's do down, down, up, down, up, right? And I'm just going to go between these 3 chords. Doesn't get much easier than this, right? And this is already boring. So if we're trying to make this more interesting, that first thing I mentioned is switching up the technique. So what I mean by this is right now I'm strumming. I'm doing a very basic strum pattern. And there's essentially a few different things I can do to switch up the technique. One is I could switch the strum pattern, but I want to even get more out there than that. I want to switch up the actual way, the methodology that I'm playing the ukulele. The easiest thing to do is to jump from strumming to finger picking, or from finger picking to strumming, depending on where you're at. And so what I'm going to now do is I'm going to use fingers. I'm going to assign 1 finger per string, my thumb on the G here, index on the C, middle here on the E, and ring finger here on the A. And I'm going to pluck the strings in different ways as a different sound. I'm going to do one of my favorite patterns to do. You can do this on low G or on high G, but it'll sound more like mine on a high G. Call this an in to out pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pluck my C string, then my E, then my G, then my A, then my G, then my E, then my C, and then my E again. And so it sounds and looks like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You see, it's the same amount of time as a strum pattern would be, right? So let's say that I'm taking this very basic chord progression of C. I'm doing 1 on that, 1 on the F, 1 on the G, and 1 on the C again. And I do my strum, but then maybe I do my pick. Right now I'm just going between the C chord and the F. If I introduce the G in there too, kind of cool, right? Now that's a lot in a very short amount of time, but the point here isn't so that you necessarily do that exact picking pattern, but rather you think, hey, if I'm strumming something normally, maybe I should finger pick it. And more so than just all finger pick it, maybe I can go between strumming and finger picking. Traversing between these different techniques can add a lot of different layers and sound, and you don't have to lock into just one technique. You don't have to just strum a song or just pick a song. You can do 50% of each, or even more or less different percentage breakdowns depending on what your interest is with it, which is exactly what makes it so cool and such a fun thing to work on. The pattern I just played there is just that in to out pattern, but you can do anything as long as you have the same amount of beats represented with whatever you're playing. So if you're looking for like different finger picking patterns or something like that, as long as you line it up with whatever the strum pattern is that you're using, you can kind of go back and forth. And that's what makes this such a cool exercise when you're playing, is the melding of techniques, doing them, finger picking and strumming together. Another thing that I really like to do with switching up the technique is thumb versus index with strumming. The index finger is usually preferred for strumming with my down and ups, but sometimes I want this sort of sweeping sound of my thumb kind of going through the strings. And so maybe on the first beat of each strum, I'll take my thumb and I'll strum through the chord that way. That's kind of a cool sound, right? So if I do that on the first one, I do that same chord progression of C, F, G, back to C, that might sound something like this. Kind of neat, right? You notice I'm not playing this perfectly. My finger picking pattern, sometimes I'll misstrike a string or whatever else, and that's all fine. In fact, those variations create more depth and add more creativity to your playing. So that's rule one, is add some creativity by switching up the techniques. If you're strumming, try finger picking. If you're finger picking, try strumming. Try using your thumb on some of those strums to kind of sweep through. You can also introduce different techniques like chunking or raschiato or all sorts of different things like that. But variation in the technique is a great way to add some creativity. The second way that I like to work on this is to try on some different chords. So this can be as complicated as you'd like or as simple as you'd like. So let me explain. Different chords are going to be typically what we call chord extensions. So in this case, our three chords, C, F, and G, are all no numbers following them. It's just C, F, G, not say, C major 7, F 6, and G 7, right? These numbers that can be added to the end of chords can oftentimes give you an extended sound that can add some creativity. There are sets of sort of rules that you want to follow to create consistently good tones in terms of using music theory to find these extensions, and that can sound really scary as I'm talking about it. So I want to introduce this little concept that's the golden rule of music, which is if it sounds good, it works. And this is a really powerful tool to realize that, hey, I don't necessarily need to know why what I'm playing works, as long as it works. That's really what's important. And so the first thing I'll show you is our C. I'm going to play what's called a C major 7 chord. The way I play that is I just take this 3 and I turn it into a 2. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times a C major 7 works in place of a C chord. And you'll know if it works or doesn't work by the simple virtue of, do you like the sound of it? If you do like the sound of it, then it works. I like the sound of it here, so we'll roll with that. Now we go to our F chord, right? Well, I'm going to play what's called an F add 9 chord. And an F add 9 chord is played like this. It's literally an F chord with your middle finger off the G string. Now if you're playing a high G like me, this is my favorite chord on a high G ukulele. And what's cool about it is it's got this complicated name, F add 9. We're not going to dive into the theory behind it right now. We just need to listen. Does it sound good? And yeah, it sounds real good, doesn't it? On a low G, it can be a little boomy. And I'll talk about that in a moment and give some alternative ways of playing some of these chords. But the logic here is just sometimes with a chord, you can just open up a string and it sounds great. In the case of this F chord, this note right here, the second fret on the G string, is an A note. Now, if I play my A here and my A here open, you hear they're the same note. So that doesn't sound very good when I'm doing something like finger picking, right? Because I get that same note over and over. So opening the string makes it just sound that much richer, that much more interesting, and I'm going to just leave it open. The name F add 9, not really important, more just, hey. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it, right? If you're playing a low G, you can try another chord, or if you're playing a high G and you want something jazzier, we can play 5, 5, 0, 0. This is called an F major 7 chord. Love this chord, another favorite of mine. Use whichever one you want. And then for the G chord, well, we can normally play our G, right? Well, some of you might know what to play here. It's a G7, which is just flip-flopping this E string from 3 to 1. And that works great. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we can get too stuck up with trying to become really creative. Like we take every chord and we try to make it as creative as possible, and we end up getting bogged down by all of these decisions. And so the G7, I think, even though it's not that complicated of a choice, I think works really well to create the tension and just sounds nice. So what we have now is our C major 7, our F add 9 or F major 7, and our G7. So if I play my very basic strum pattern that I started with, it sounds like this with these new chords. And this is already an improvement, I think. But what if I take the first thing we worked on too, switching up the technique? That's pretty cool, isn't it, right? I've just taken two concepts and added it to this, and you can hear how this very basic progression already sounds so much richer and crazier with it, right? And what's cool is I'm adding a lot of layers of depth here. A little note is like with the chords, I changed all 3 of the chords we're playing. When you're practicing yourself, you don't have to change all the chords. You don't have to be all or nothing. You can just be a little of something when you're working on this. So maybe if there's one chord you don't like the sound of, you change it up a little bit. For me with this, I don't like this F chord because I don't like these 2 A notes. It's harsh sounding. Now low G, it sounds better because you get that octave spread, but on the high G, it's just a little too much. So opening up the G string, it's just this nice sound that opens up the tone a little bit. And so if that's all I did to the chords, it's still nice. I don't necessarily have to add all the crazy versions of chords every time. I can just change maybe one. And I think that's an important note with this, is you don't have to necessarily do it all. You can just work on whatever you want to add that creativity to your playing. So our first thing was changing up the techniques, right? We worked on using our thumb to strum through on like downstrokes and talked about some finger picking instead of strumming, or how you can strum instead of finger pick. The second thing we worked on here was switching up the chords, trying on different chords, adding chord extensions. If you know some music theory, you can use some of that there. And if you don't know any music theory, it's okay to just kind of look up random number chords, try things out, see what fits if you like the sound. Again, it's all a matter of personal preference with this, and if it sounds good to you, roll with it. One of my favorite things to do is just open up a string, see how it sounds. Sometimes it sounds really good. But the third thing we're going to talk about here is the use of rubato. And rubato is a musical term that means to play with feeling, which I think is a little bit of a joke. Bear with me, because I think anytime you're playing a musical instrument, you're playing with feeling, right? I mean, that's kind of a prerequisite to a human being doing something, is they're feeling something as they're playing. So rubato is just playing with more feeling. It's more human emotion shown in what you're playing musically. So how do we quantify that? How do we like describe exactly what that is? And usually the best way to think about it is the use of dynamics in terms of volume, so playing louder and softer, as well as, more importantly, playing with sort of dynamics to your tempo, to your sense of beat when you're going. Rubato will slow things down and kind of speed things up to communicate something musically, much in the same way we as people will like increase our breathing, or our heart rate will go up and will go down because of emotions that we're feeling. This is a musical way to communicate something like that. Typically speaking, rubato is going to be more slowing things down than it is speeding up, but you can use rubato to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. And using dynamics with this of getting louder and softer to help communicate that can really make this an opportunity to be really emotive with your playing. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm just going to take I'll take my fancy chords because I think they sound cool. But I'm going to do my very basic strum pattern, and I'm going to use my thumb on the first strum. And when I use the thumb on the first strum, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to kind of slow down and like bring things down a bit. And then I'll speed up a little bit as I go into the next one. I'll slow down. And it should sound kind of like breathing. You should be able to kind of feel that human breathing type of element. It might sound like this. You can hear what I did there is I didn't take every chord and play them exactly the same way, but I would start playing a chord, maybe I'd speed up into the next chord, right? As I'm going through, sort of like inhaling really deeply or something. And as I go out of that progression and sort of finish it, that might be sort of like the breath is all the way in, you're taking your full breath, your breath slows to nothing because you've inhaled. And now maybe the next time I play, it's like the exhale, and I speed up until my breath is completely gone. And as I'm exhaling, I'm out of breath. And this is a really fun concept to kind of play with because it just gives you more of this, again, human emotion to be able to play with on whatever it is you're working on. And so if I play it with just the strumming and I play the chords, again, it might sound something like this. You'll notice something else I'm doing here is I'm playing with those dynamics. I tend to go faster and get a little louder, and when I go slower, I tend to get a little softer. And you can hear that adds this whole new layer and element. What's fun about this is I'm going to actually now look at playing all of these different pieces together. So I'm going to be using my thumb with the strumming and finger picking with my variations of techniques, using these different chords that we just talked about. I'm going to use rubato with it too. So I'm going to take this very basic progression that sounds like play something a little bit more like this. Kind of nice, right? It's just adding a little bit of texture through these different things. Now, what I want you to think of with these different techniques, think of them like flavoring when you're cooking, whatever spices you're adding to your dish. Some dishes you want to have a lot of flavor, really robust, complicated flavors, right? So you're adding quite a bit of different things. But it's actually more rare than it is common that you add a lot of any one spice to a dish, right? A little bit of spice goes a long way in terms of, if you're only using one spice, you'll add more. But if you're adding lots of spices, it's best to not overpower with any one. And it's the combination of them that creates a really nice depth to the dish that you're making. Think of these techniques the same way. Maybe when you're playing it through, the first thing, talk about like finger picking to strumming or using the thumb with the strum. Maybe just having one strum with the thumb is enough of that flavor. And then when we switch up the chords, maybe you just switch up one of the chords and that's enough of that flavor. And then when you're playing rubato and dynamics, maybe you get a little bit louder, a little bit softer, but not much. And that's enough of that one flavor for you. And that might sound something like this, where I'm going to strum through with the thumb for the technique change for the first beat of each thing. I'm only going to play the F add 9 differently. The C and G will play the same way. And then I'm going to just slow down and get softer at the end. That's my use of rubato. So this is a little bit of flavor with it. And that might sound like this. That was actually kind of nice, wasn't it? I didn't do a lot of any one thing. It was a very small amount, but they all added up to make it a very different feel than just sitting there doing the same things over and over. So just keep that in mind. Less is more. When you're learning it, we tend to add too much, just like a lot of times when people are learning to cook, they tend to add too much flavors. And unlike, cooking where you've got recipes to follow, music's a little bit more freehand, and that's one of the things that makes it magical, but it's also one of the things that makes it very challenging. So try doing less sometimes to see if it adds more to your playing. And there you have it. Those are the 3 things that I think are great ways to add creativity to your playing. All of these are inspired by Rachel's awesome performance of Drunken Sailor using the claw hammer technique, which I don't know how to do, and I had a great time watching it because it's just awesome. Adding these elements of different techniques and approaches can really add some, again, creativity to your playing. I'm going to check out the forums now. So if you're watching this live, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the chat. If you're watching this as a recording, I always read all of the posts on Rock Class 101. And so if you have a question and are unable to make it live, feel free to leave them there in the comments. And so let's look in the chat. Andy says, cool suggestions, makes the playing sound much more sophisticated without adding a huge amount of technical difficulty. Exactly. And that's the less is more concept too with it. Andy says, my teacher explained that when the same chord is repeated for a couple of bars or more, throwing in a sus4 chord adds interest and movement and forward movement. Absolutely. A sus4 chord takes the third of the chord, raises it to the fourth, which creates a little bit of tension because it wants to go back down to the third. If I did that with the C chord, for instance, let's say right here, I add the 1 on the E string and take it off. Great way to add some different texture. It kind of falls into the first thing we talked about, or second thing, of trying on different chords, these little variations. Very, very cool. We've got some comments in the Rock Class forums. The Bumble Bard, who made this awesome video, says, I'll just leave this here to stew while y'all are on vacation. I was just on vacation, actually, which is why we're doing this on the 4th Saturday or 4th Tuesday, instead of the 2nd. She says, such a great topic. Very excited for this one. To me, the best way to add more creativity to your routine is to personify your uke as much as possible. Give it literal human attributes, such as an eyes and a mouth. Take it out on town, wine and dine it. Feed it soup by the spoonful, a big old bowl tomato soup. Drive it back home, then tell it your darkest dreams and wishes. If you're deemed worthy, it shall whisper in your ears the secrets to creativity. For real, I think the best way to be more creative is to look at what is and try to imagine what could be. Yeah, that definitely adds a lot more creativity. Personifying your uke, I'm all for. Be careful with spoonfuls of tomato soup in it, though. I'm not recommending that. But that last statement of the best way to be more creative is to look at what is and try to imagine what could be is a fantastic phrase. And so I strongly recommend everyone think about that when you're playing something. What could I do to it? And don't be afraid to experiment with it and suck. That has to happen when you're playing with things. If you are afraid of sucking, you will never not suck, because you have to not suck or you have to suck to not suck. Sounds crazy, but you need to make mistakes is what I'm trying to say. It's so critical to have that element of trial and error, experiment with things, get the sounds that aren't great so you know what the not great sounds are so that you can be closer to finding those good ones. So Lisa DMH says, here are my thoughts based on the way I see too many people playing. Break out of the strum, and sing rut. Rock Class 101 can help you with that. Travel way up the neck. Rock Class 101 can help you with that. Add a backbeat. Rock Class 101 can help you with that. Too long didn't read. Join Rock Class 101. Absolutely, right? Getting different techniques and approaches. Good place to find them is right here on Rock Class. Joe150 says, well, I broke my left hand. What do you think I can do with my right hand? I go back to the doctor on August 8th and hopefully I can use my left hand. Yeah, that's no fun at all. And so if you broke your fretting hand, I assume, you can just work on finger-picking patterns and strumming and things like that. Cool thing about the ukulele is when it's open, it's an A minor 7 or a C6 chord, depending on how you look at it. So it sounds musical. So I'd recommend just using this opportunity to work on different strumming techniques and finger-picking techniques, because the ukulele just sounds awesome, just open, nothing else. Martin writes, any rules to follow when picking a finger picking that matches the strumming? So sort of. The ultimate rule here is you want to make sure you're in the same timing. So A finger picking pattern in 4/4 will work well with a strumming pattern that is in 4/4. They could have different rhythmic elements, which means, one of them might be more syncopated with accents on offbeats while another one's less syncopated. And that's okay. It's okay to try to do a syncopated pattern in something that you normally don't play syncopated. And that could be that creativity, that variation to what you're playing. It's very possible it just won't work with the song, and that's fine. You just want to try to find another one. So the sort of rule there is it has to be in the same time signature. You have to have the same number of beats per measure so that you're not playing in a completely different time, which is critical if you're ever going to play it with somebody else or you're singing the song or anything like that. As far as other hard and fast rules, you don't have to line up the finger picking pattern exactly to the strum pattern unless you want it lined up exactly to the strum pattern, in which case you can, but you don't have to. It can be fun to experiment with a little bit. Andy says, yes, moving the chords up the neck adds a lot of interest. It can stand out in a jam session where everyone else is playing the open chords. Yep, fantastic. If you're playing ukulele with other ukulele players, moving chord shapes up the neck is a wonderful way to create a different type of sound. However, I'm not the biggest fan of moving chords up the neck and doing bar chords and things above the 5th fret, because I feel like it closes the range of the instrument. So if you're playing with other ukulele players, that's fine, because they're playing the open chords and they're getting those low end sounds. So that's wonderful. Now they're playing down here, you're playing up here. But if I'm playing with a guitarist or a bass player or just by myself, I don't like to just play up here, because up here is more narrow than down here for the low end, and the ukulele already struggles in that way, right? So what I like to do is I like to play what I call situational chords, which are where you try to use open strings when you can, when the chords allow you to, and then use higher notes on the other strings to create these big open voices. To give you an example of this, if you learn a C chord up the neck, you might learn this C chord. You may have played this one before. Barring across the 7th fret of all 4 strings, add the middle finger here on the 8th fret of the E string and your ring finger here to the 9th fret of the G. This is a C chord, and I can't stand this C chord. It's so narrow, it's so tinny, it just doesn't sound great. Because my lowest note is right here, it's this G, and it's not low enough for me. I want to use more of the ukulele. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at this chord, I'm going to look at this note here, and this note here, the 8 on the E and the 7 on the A, and I'm going to put those on, and then I'll use my open G and open C. This is actually the same thing. These are both C chords. In fact, it's just doubling different notes, but my notes of C, E, and G are still all present. So I like to look at chords in this way to try to make these big open voicings of chords. Anytime you have an open string, you can do cool stuff like this. This is a great C chord, for instance, for that reason, right? I love that type of sound, just using open strings as much as I can, because it creates a richer tone. And so if you know what the notes are on the chord and you map them on the fretboard, you can find different versions that chord books and things might not. It's also why I like doing big stretches on my ukulele to kind of create these different sounds. And it's what can create different sounds. Now, obviously, those stretches are pretty big, but the concept of spreading it out using things like open strings can really help to add even more creativity yet. So let me see if there are any other questions here on the forums and stuff. Let's see, anyone here? And if you're watching this live and want to leave a question, feel free to leave one. Doesn't look like there's any other questions there. Anyone over here? Doesn't look like it. Well, just to recap, today we talked about 3 different ways to add creativity to your practice. The first one that we worked on is switching up the technique. If you're strumming something, try finger picking. If you're finger picking, try strumming. Don't necessarily just do finger picking or just strumming. Do a mixture of the two. Try doing some strumming, then some finger picking, some strumming, some finger picking, or maybe it's some strumming, finger picking, strumming. Mix it up in different ways. And not just going from strumming to finger picking, but think about what techniques each one of them can use. With strumming, maybe I use my thumb some in addition to the index finger. With finger picking, maybe I switch it up to different styles of patterns or different fingers being used. anything you can do to switch up the technique can add a lot more flavor to your playing. The second thing there was trying on different chords. Whether you know quite a bit about music theory and chord extensions and know about how you can properly use seventh chords to add richer harmony, or if you don't at all and you just sort of try out different versions of chords that you know, whether that's playing a C major 7 instead of your C chord, or just trying to open up a string that's closed, like I love doing on my F chord, just opening the G string. Sounds awesome, doesn't it? Technically called an F add 9, but more importantly, it sounds good. And if it sounds good, that's all that really matters when you're playing music. The third thing that we talked about there is adding rubato and dynamics. Rubato means to play more with feeling, to be more emotive really with your playing. And that usually means that you're going to be speeding up and slowing down to help communicate things musically. Dynamics are the same concept, but in terms of volume, getting louder and softer to help communicate. Adding all of these different things can create a really rich opportunity for creative growth in your playing, and it's a lot of fun. And you can take something that's quite boring and make it quite flavorful. And remember, when you're doing this, less is more a lot of the times. It can be overwhelming to try to switch up every chord and every technique and use rubato and dynamics on every phrase. Just do a little bit of each, and you'll notice it goes a long way. So thank you all so much for attending this live stream. If you're watching this as a recording, we do one of these on the second Tuesday of every month. This one was on the 4th because it's summer and it is the summer of chaos with my son home from school. I think next month will also be at a weird Tuesday. Stay tuned. But then as we move into the fall, things will settle down a bit for the every second Tuesday of the month. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll look forward to seeing you all on the next lesson here on Rock Class 101. Thank you so much. Take it easy. Oh, and special thanks to Rachel for the amazing performance of Drunken Sailor with Clawhammer. I think I need to go learn that. Take it easy.